Gur mé mágad les cean cóla agus bhfuil an bucht gach leis néide stáite sucht teachtasteach agus is seo thógáil. And I think it is fitting that today, when I did something I only do once a week, I collected my post in Leinster House. I got a government notice of statutory instruments, designation of special areas of conservation County Galway for the attention of landowners and land users. And these are the designation of SPAs that have now been confirmed at the European Union level. And they afford huge protection. Environmental protection, in fact, people would argue about environmental protection over and above human protection in terms of creating employment, having roads, having water systems, having sewage systems, and so on and so on and so on. Now, this is very relevant to today's debate because I'm sure the Minister would agree that we do need to preserve the environment, both on land and on sea, irrespective of who's doing the developing. The second thing is, I'm sure the Minister believes in balance. There's no absolute good in anything humans do. There's always a balance, there's always a trade-off. And therefore I think there's nobody who doesn't agree with the harnessing of our massive natural resource, particularly wind off the coast, waves, tides, and anything that can be done. But in doing that, I think it's important to strike that balance and to listen to the concerns of local communities and to make sure that we strike a balance between the wind energy targets and the rights of residents in various areas. Now, one of the biggest challenges we face is the increasing size of turbines. Originally, turbines were very small. The Lascan Corley would be familiar with the turbines in Cusharriga that Polo Fuil erected many years ago, which look very small today. But they have grown. And just to give you an example, Minister, the Arklow Bank, I'm told, the turbines are 12 kilometres out to sea and they're 124 metres tall. Now, 12 kilometres out to sea, 124 metres. Now, if we take that and compare to what's proposed, we say, for example, on the Scarred the Rocks, where they're not going to be, some of them will be up to 11, but some will be as near, I understand, as less than 6 kilometres. And they're 300 plus metres to the height of the Eiffel Tower in height, in one of the most pristine and beautiful areas in the country, near human habitation, where there's quite a considerable population. And therefore the question has to be asked, where is the balance? Of course, if they were out in the ocean, if there were floating turbines, there'd be no problem. But in our rush, and it's an understandable rush to get wind energy harnessed, these have been proposed as fixed base turbines. Now, I'm not trying to get into here today into the planning of these in terms of there will be a statutory planning process tomorrow, I understand, and you can maybe outline all of that. But there is a need to update the 2006 because I've just outlined to you the huge change in the technology. To update the 2006 wind development guidelines and to make sure that they meet the new requirements in terms of the height of these turbines and the distance they're assessed from the nearest human habitation. And if we don't tackle this, I think we're going to find that we're taking a shortcut to nowhere. And we've seen this in the past where in people's hurry and unwillingness to try to strike the right balance, that they actually caused more delay than if they had taken a more considered and balanced approach and got everybody to move forward together. And there's certainly one thing I'd say to you, Minister, here. I think there would be, after all of the restrictions placed in these communities that I started with, there would be a huge resentment if anyone said to them that their lives, their quality of life doesn't count equally.
Again, thank Deputy Ó Cuív for raising this as a topical. And at the outset, I'd just like to highlight that the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage has responsibility for planning guidelines for onshore wind energy development. Following a recent transfer of functions from this department, the Department of Environment, Climate Communications, DEC, has responsibility for guidelines for offshore wind energy development in the context of that department's responsibility for marine planning. With regard to onshore wind energy, the Department of Housing is currently undertaking a focused review of the 2006 Wind Energy Development Guidelines. The review is addressing a number of key aspects of the guidelines, including setback distance, noise, shadow flicker, community obligation, community dividend and grid connections. The review aims to strike an appropriate balance between addressing the concerns of local communities, as the Deputy has raised, by ensuring that there is greater and earlier community engagement by wind energy developments, whilst maintaining Ireland's ability to deliver on its binding climate and renewable energy policy obligations. It is envisaged that the revised guidelines will provide greater consistency of approach in planning for onshore wind energy development and will provide certainty and clarity to the planning system, to the wind industry and to local communities. The Department of Housing, in conjunction with DEC, which has primary responsibility for environmental noise matters, has been working in advance guidance on the noise aspect of the guidelines, having regard to, inter alia, the revised 2030 target to generate up to 80% of our electricity from renewable sources, and this work is substantially complete. The Department of Housing, in conjunction with DEC, will make any further changes to the draft guidelines that are deemed necessary or appropriate in the wake of this work, with a view to concluding the review of the guidelines at the earliest possible opportunity. With regard to guidelines for offshore wind energy developments, the Maritime Area Planning Act of 2021, known as the MAP Act, introduced a comprehensive new marine planning management regime for Ireland's maritime area, including forward planning, authorisations and enforcement. The MAP Act includes provisions for the development of statutory marine planning guidelines. The offshore wind energy marine planning guidelines are the first to be developed under these provisions. The purpose of these guidelines would be to set out the various elements that make up offshore wind energy developments, creating a common understanding amongst stakeholders, clarify the decision-making process, requirements and organisational rules under the MAP Act as they relate to development permission for fixed foundation offshore wind energy, and inform offshore wind energy planning applications, as well as a subsequent process of making development permission determinations, particularly in relation to requirements of the National Marine Planning Framework. Offshore wind energy is an emerging industry in Ireland, with all actors working in a new legislative framework, much of which is being applied for the first time. In this context, the offshore wind energy marine planning guidelines are being informed by related existing guidelines and guidance across government, as well as lessons learned from other jurisdictions, and discussions are ongoing with teams in relevant departments in this regard. A dedicated and regularly convened working group, including representatives from DEC, from both Penala, Maritime Area Regulatory Authority and the Marine Institute, is supporting development of the offshore guidelines. In addition, DEC is seeking to provide more expert resources to support development of these guidelines. In accordance with the requirements of the guidelines are subject to strategic environment assessment and appropriate assessment before they can be finalised, and an independent consultant has been retained to help deliver these assessments. As part of these processes, the draft offshore wind energy and marine planning guidelines will be subject to public consultation once prepared. And again, I'll come back in on a supplement, Lasca Hirlock, just in relation to the issue around public participation and striking that balance that the Deputy is quite right about in terms of genuine concerns of local residents and the increasing size of turbines. But again, it will be welcome news to the Deputy that the new guidelines for onshore will be published shortly.
Minister, this reply is unusually helpful, because normally we get 2 or 3 pages that never address the issue until the last 3 lines. So I'd like to thank you for that and for the effort that has been put in for giving a meaningful answer. Now, I think you'd agree it would be a reasonable supposition that whatever guidelines you bring in on land, that in terms of height versus setback, would apply on near, inshore, offshore turbines. Now, I will put on a topical issue, might get lucky again in the lottery of topical issues, to the Minister of the Environment and give him an opportunity to come in and explain his side of the story. But I presume that if you decide on land that from a house it has to be a certain distance relative to the height, that will apply also to houses that are on the land where the turbines are in the sea. Anything else, I think you would agree, would be irrational. The second thing is, I obviously welcome that the issue of noise, which would also apply on the sea, in fact, noise would probably travel better over the sea than over land, shadow flicker, community obligation, community dividend and grid connections. I think it's good that these will all be in the guidelines. So, Minister, can you answer the $60 question? Because I think this is going to have a huge effect on the marine guidelines too, because they'll be, for the near inshore ones, they'll be fairly similar. Can you tell me when they're likely to be published? And don't tell me very soon or in due course or after a proper process, because it's 2.6. Look at the changes in the world between 2.6 and 2024. So I need to get a real clear indication when these are going to be. And I would presume, and I'll certainly be pursuing your colleague, party leader, to ensure that the guidelines and these issues relating to marine or offshore turbines would also be published at the same time. Sure. And can I finally say, Minister, if people think that it's public consultation to a bad guidelines and laws that don't really take them into account but have plenty of consultation about it, but the game over before you start, I think they misunderstand ordinary people.
A couple of things just in relation to the community engagement. There is supplementary to the wind energy development guidelines. There is a code of practice for wind energy development in Ireland, guidelines for community engagement. So I'm of the view, I think, and certainly under ARHAS and public participation directive, that engagement should take place at an early stage of any process of development of onshore or offshore. I think that's hugely important. In terms of the onshore guidelines, my understanding is that the updated guidelines will be published in Q3 of this year, as far as I understand it. I can't give an indication in terms of the offshore, but obviously it is contingent on quite a number of other factors, not just in terms of proximity to housing that might be on the shoreline. And these include, as you mentioned earlier, special protected areas for birds, marine protected areas, the legislation for which we'll be publishing shortly. But all of these are important considered factors that have to be taken into account in terms of the location of offshore wind as well. I won't comment further in terms of the increasing size of turbines, but all of this will be developed in the new guidelines that are due to be published. And I think you're correct, Deputy, to say that it is important to strike a balance in terms of the balance of listening to concerns of local communities and taking on board their rights, and I think that's hugely important. It hasn't always been the case in this country, but I think it's important to do that. So again, just to give assurance in terms of the onshore guidelines will be published once the process is complete with DEC and our department in terms of noise, and the offshore, again, I can't give a date, but I will revert to the Deputy in relation to the possible timeline for the publication of that. Thank you.